Hi, I'm Jamie Stanviner. I'm going to be asking Norman Finkelstein a few questions about what's going on in Gaza.
Let's just clarify that today is Monday, July 28th, and it's the second video we're doing.
Okay. There's just been reports that Israel has again attacked the Shifa hospital. Is there a rationale behind what Israel's doing, or has it simply gone crazy?
Oh, well, there's a temptation to describe what Israel is doing as a country gone insane, and I've not resisted that temptation, and at some level they have gone completely over the cliff. But there is a rational motive behind what Israel is doing. You have to bear in mind that when Israel launches these periodic massacres in Gaza, it has a twofold aim. The first aim, as is perfectly obvious, is to inflict some terror bombing in order to force the civilian population into submission. And the second aim is not to incur significant combatant casualties, so they want to blast everything in sight. Those are the two principal purposes behind the kinds of massive death and destruction Israel has been inflicting periodically on Gaza. So if you take the case as of now, we have to look at the specifics of the situation. It's not an exact repeat of what happened in 2008-9. It has its specific characteristics. The first important specific characteristic is, in fact, Israel has not invaded significantly into Gaza. It's basically the ground invasion has limited itself to the border area. The reason it's limited itself to the border area is perfectly obvious. Namely, they don't want to inflict or have suffer major combatant casualties. And there is an awareness that even with the massive terror bombing, if they enter into what's called the built-up areas of Gaza, and they have to engage in street by street fighting with the Hamas militants, that they will incur significant military casualties. Whenever the prospect of significant military casualties looms, as it did in one neighborhood, I can't pronounce it exactly. Do you know the exact pronunciation? Shujaya. Israel freely admitted, as I posted on my website, that the reason it blasted everything in sight, and the commander said so, we blasted everything in sight because in order to take Shujaya without blasting everything in sight, we would have to suffer major combatant casualties. To put it simply, Israel, not unlike other great power armies, it's a totally cowardly army, doesn't want to suffer any military casualties. It wants to have a high-tech massacre. But that's been pretty limited. And there is a concern now, judging by the Israeli press, that if they press the ground invasion more, even with blasting everything in sight, once they get into the built-up areas, they'll have to face significant conflict, significant engagement with the Hamas militants, and they might suffer significant combatant casualties. So for the moment, they've limited the ground invasion to the border. And then the second reason for the attack, not to protect its combatants, the second reason is it's a terror campaign. And the terror campaign consists of two aspects. The first aspect of the terror campaign is they're hoping that they inflict so much massive death and destruction that when a humanitarian ceasefire occurs, the people come out of their homes, they see that there's nothing left that they will give up. That they will, as Haaretz's leading military analyst, Amos Harel, put it today, that they will look around them, they will start rebuilding, and once they start rebuilding, they won't want the ceasefire to end, and then Israel gets its way, namely an unconditional ceasefire without lifting the blockade. The second reason, the second motive behind the terror bombing is they're hoping, and again, Amos Haro freely acknowledges it today in Haaretz. He says that they're hoping that once people see what happened, namely after the current massacre ends, once people look around and see what happens, Hamas will not be able to proclaim a victory, and people will start blaming Hamas, and they will try to overthrow Hamas or get rid of Hamas. And that's actually what happened after the 2008-9 Israeli massacre. Hamas proclaimed a victory. The people did celebrate the victory, but then after they looked around and it began to sink in the magnitude of the damage, destruction that Israel inflicted, they started to blame Hamas and say this thing was stupid, what you did. And they're hoping it'll happen again. That's standard operating procedure. It was the same reason the U.S. imposed the brutal sanctions on Iraq, hoping there would be a civilian uprising against Saddam Hussein, blaming him for the sanctions. And now they're hoping that once a ceasefire sets in and the people look around and see there's nothing left in Gaza, that they will blame Hamas for this disaster and they will rid themselves of it. So to sum up, there are two major goals behind this current lunacy, but to quote the old phrase, there is, from Shakespeare, there is method in the madness. It is lunatic. It's a lunatic state. Let's be honest about that. But there is method in it. The first method is preserve intact the IDF, no combatant casualties. So wherever there is a potential for combatant casualties, you blast everything in sight. That's what they did in Shujaya. And the second goal is straight out terror bombing, hopefully hoping that in the midst of a humanitarian ceasefire, people will look around, try to rebuild, and decide they don't want to continue. And also in the longer term, for people to blame Hamas for the massive death and destruction, and for the people to rid themselves of Hamas.